My grandfather was born more than 100 years ago in the very far north of Europe. Throughout his entire life, he never ever went abroad. I was 5 or maybe 6 years old the first time me and my family traveled overseas. We went to the Great Britain, although I there and then never understood what was so great about Great Britain. The grown-ups spoke another language known as English, and I was amazed when I realized that even their young children at my age seemed to know it. In my family, we have always gathered at nights to follow the weather forecasts. I would say it's one of our everyday highlights to some extent. So did we that first night in Great Britain. We gathered to watch the weather forecast, but this forecast would forever change my life. Watching the weather forecast that first night, when the maps the weatherman used was shown, I was amazed, I was even shocked, because then I understood that we were living off the map. We seemed to live outside the known world. I mean, I was a child, I was shocked, of course, what could I do? But I realized that for generations, my family had been struggling in a terra incognito. I would say that I, there and then, became a geographer focusing on remote areas, peripheral areas, areas off the map. And ever since, I have tried to answer the question, why? Why would anyone want to travel to a place like this, much less live here? So that was like the introduction, I would say. And when I hear myself speak it out loud, I realized that I organized my speech a little bit like an academic thesis. So if this then was the introduction, I'll now move on to the theoretical part before I finish with some breathtaking conclusions. So, why would anyone want to travel in the first place anyway? As long as there has been humans, there has been travels. Ever since ancient times, the reasons for travel have been many, but to some degree always connected to a desire to see or have something else, something different, or something that you don't have at home in your everyday life. United Nations World Tourism Organization, there is such an organization, they have made a definition to tourism where they state that tourism comprises the activities of persons traveling in places outside their usual environment for not more than 1 year for leisure, business, or other purposes. So this definition tells us that tourism is to live the everyday life for any reason. And I would say that the main reason to travel to the area where I come from is leisure. So let's dig deeper into the wonderful world of leisure travel. Leisure travel is strongly associated with the Industrial Revolution in Great Britain. I know that not because I Googled it or something, but I have actually been to Great Britain. Pre the Industrial Revolution, during the agricultural era, people like my grandfather, they used to work and work and work and work. They worked 7 days a week. They hardly ever slept. Well, they did sleep sometimes during surgery, etc. But they did live a hard life, and there were no such thing as leisure time or much less leisure travel. Up until the 19th century, Leisure travel was a status symbol, mainly for people in Great Britain. But in the same century, something interesting happened, because there and then also the working class started to travel. At the weekends and during holidays, people wanted to escape the towns that had become crowded, dirty, polluted due to urbanization and factories. The working class was attracted to the fresh air and the space in the countryside. To some extent, rural tourists were born already there and then. If we should make another pause, I should do a small clarification. You should bear in mind now that the majority of research and literature focusing on this subject mainly deals or primarily focus with Anglo-Saxon and European countries, and does not necessarily represent a worldwide view of this topic. Interestingly though, a lot of people still don't travel abroad during their lifetime. But having said that, today in the developed countries, with an increased wealth, more and more spare time, technical development, low-cost airlines caused by a deregulation of the airline industry, many people can travel more or less wherever they want to, whenever they want to. If it weren't for the lack of the main limitations, the lack of time and money, I think that most people would travel all over the world all the time. But they don't. They don't because traveling, and especially traveling to areas like this, remote areas, means high travel costs and long travel time. Obviously, these areas are by definition located where most people don't live. That's what makes them remote. It's not that hard to be a researcher sometimes, because some things are quite logical. I might skip this section next time, actually. Well, however, there are, of course, also potential negative impacts of rural tourism, mostly connected to fragile habitats and fragile heritage. If we, for example, regard a rural tourist phenomenon known as indigenous tourism, which is tourism connected to First Nations, Aboriginal, Maori people, etc. On the one hand, the touristification of these native cultures is needed to attract visitors to the region. But on the other hand, it also risks commercializing the indigenous culture. Let me give you one example. You're laughing. This photo is taken some years ago in New Zealand, and I know what you're thinking. First Great Britain, then New Zealand. This guy has been around, hasn't he? Yeah, I have. Some of you might also reflect upon the fact that I did already by then have the same practical haircut. That's another part I might leave out in the future. The guy you see here to the left is a Maori guy, a jolly good fellow that I met there. And when he weren't on stage performing, meeting the tourists, he worked at the university, if I remember it right, in Auckland, New Zealand. So performances like this risks to spread a historical image of a noble savage rather than representing the indigenous everyday life. So there are pitfalls, but also many opportunities with tourism, rural tourism, and, like in this case, indigenous tourism. If we move on, or move back in this case, to the indigenous tourism found in Northern Europe, in Northern Scandinavia, the Sami tourism, partly found in the area of Lapland, we see a development where there starts up more and more indigenous tourist businesses. For them, tourism offers an opportunity to generate incomes when the traditional source of income, the reindeer herding, really is struggling to make both ends meet. Another picture from the family album. This is a pretty good picture, I would say. I actually took it myself. I think this photo can serve as an example of the fact that in particular women and elderly are excluded from the increasingly physical and motorized reindeer herding. So in times and areas where there are few other job opportunities, tourism is often considered as a way to blessing. You can see the headlines, tourism, the new reindeer. But will then tourism in the long run be a curse or a blessing for remote areas? I would say, as a researcher, I am optimistic. It's quite a relief to hear, isn't it? But tourism, by definition, means leaving everyday life. You have learned that already. So in times of rapid urbanization and heavy workloads, people will travel in search for something different, something else. They will travel to find less crowded areas, beautiful natural scenery, new experiences, other cultures, and the opportunity to have what they don't have at home. That was a long sentence, almost making me breathless. But didn't I tell you already in the beginning that the concluding parts would be breathtaking? Took me a while to figure that one out, but I'm quite happy how it came out. The rural tourism will generate incomes for rural populations, enabling inhabitants to continue living in these areas like this. Handled correctly, I would say that indigenous tourism can be a way to attract visitors, create wealth, but also spread knowledge. Knowledge increases understanding. So in this way, indigenous tourism reduces tensions rooted in ignorance and alienation. In other words, what I'm saying is that rural tourism leads to a better world and better opportunities for people to continue living in rural areas like this. If I should wrap it up, I would say that I think that people will continue to travel to rural areas, such as the areas where I grew up, even though they are off the map. There are several Rob Pets out there on the World Wide Web, but there is only one Rob Pet 1 at Twitter. So don't hesitate to send me a tweet, because ordinary old-fashioned snail mail will take some time to reach to this remote but wonderful area. Thank you very much.